Yes. Sword Art Online? That is correct. Well done. 10 points over here. There's a tie between who? Bilal and Tarusha. Bilal and Tarusha, please step forward. We need one more song, Ishada. Let's break this tie.
Okay, so thank you guys for coming. Not much of people, of course, but we're gonna have a good time. So we're discussing about music in general, and then the usage of music in pop culture, and then in terms of the utilization of music as well, with regards to certain niches inside the pop culture. Now it can be either movies, or it can be TV series, or it can be games. I mean, those are basically the most used platforms in terms of musical integration to the pop culture. So the background that you guys see is basically Hans Zimmer experience. So when I teach, I usually like to add a bit of information on the background. It can sometimes be totally unrelated, or it can be related. So this was basically captured when he was performing, I think either the Batman theme or something else. Usually if he's right in front of the synthesizer, so these are basically synthesizers, what you see over here, and if he's seated right in front of it, it's usually the Batman theme. But yeah, just a brief introduction of myself. I'm a musician, a DJ and a producer. I'm signed to a bunch of labels. So a few accolades, and I've done a bit of touring in the EU, UK, India, Singapore towards the last 3 years, of course, and then I'm signed to publishing as well, which is one of the key aspects that we're discussing on this workshop as well, because publishing is directly related to the things that I discussed earlier. And then I have a few placements coming in next year in terms of like video games, and I produced soundtracks for Sri Lanka cricket. I worked with guys like High School Junkies, and I've done like a bunch of soundtracks for the Queenie live in concert as well. Enough about me. I hate doing this slide, so we'll just jump right away. So yeah, there we go. Yeah, this is enough. So musical integration into storytelling is quite important as well, and usually we consider that music is one of the invisible characters in a movie, or it can be a TV series. It's not physical, obviously, we can't see what this character is, but basically the mood or the theme is being set by this invisible character, and sometimes when we take music out of a context, we completely lose the plot line. For example, assume that someone is telling another person that they love them, and if there's a really lovely part of music, it's going to make a lot more sense, and that scene is going to be much more emotional. Yeah, but imagine that music is being taken away from the scene, and then you basically hear the road ambience, and there's kaputas, kak sounds, and then some random vehicle passing by, and that's basically the sound that is going to occupy that empty space. But what happens when that kind of a situation comes into play? That whole emotional aspect of storytelling is being taken away. So that's basically why we usually consider music as an invisible character. And then of course there's a psychological aspect. I'm gonna explain this a little bit more on the next slide. I have a really nice video. Music is basically tempo. There's a rhythm to music, and then when we integrate this rhythm which is occupied by music into a certain context, what usually happens is we can create a nice pace to the movie. Now one of the great examples would be movies like Interstellar, for example. Now there was a simple dialogue where a few police officers were bound and gagged, and then suddenly they started the music, and you can feel that something is going to happen, but we're not too sure how it's going to happen because we can't even figure out the pace or the rhythm yet. It's just one note. And if I'm giving you a bit of insights in terms of how that was being played, that was basically electric guitar with a bow, the violin bow. So that was used on an electric guitar. That's basically what they did. And then they started using a few pitch bends as well. So they started with one semitone and then they bended the string. So when you bend the string, the pitch changes. And they did it for about 2 minutes. It was a long sequence, and what was used in the movie was basically the best part of it. So it was just one note, very simple, but when I was watching this for the first time, goosebumps. Even to this day, when you watch this sequence, you get goosebumps because you feel that tension, you feel that fear. And the commissioner, of course, you saw the fear in his eyes. He was looking everywhere, and then he suddenly figured out that something was going to happen, and then they turned the gun, and then he jumped and took the shot. So this was a perfect example of music being used to create tension. And then of course we talked about leitmotifs. So now when we hear a few musical pieces, we suddenly remember people. Now there are certain musical pieces in movies which are only written to represent a certain person. Now this is Star Wars, and what I'm going to play is something that you guys have heard about a million times. So you know what it is. That's the Imperial March. That's the theme of Darth Vader in the Star Wars universe. So when we hear this, we know what's going to happen. We know that he's going to make an entrance, regardless of the scenario. If it's the movies or if it's the TV series or whatever, if there's going to be any rendition or any variation of this theme being played, we know he's going to enter. He's going to be in the sequence or the storyline. And then the next example is this. Now this became a meme later on, but this was also an iconic incident where music was used to represent an animal in this case. Now this is basically Jaws, right? I'm pretty sure you guys must have seen this movie. Very clever, just 2 notes. And then of course in my opinion, one of the best themes ever written. Now so that was Indiana Jones. So this is also an iconic representation of music being used to represent a certain personnel. Now in this case it's Indy. Now whenever he does something heroic, you get this theme. So very iconic, and one of the common denominators is John Williams. Now he composed all of these. So he's one of the premier composers that we witnessed in the movie industry. And another example comes to my mind, again John Williams. Can you guess? Harry Potter, the Harry Potter theme. That entire soundtrack is quite iconic. There are certain phrases which were used to represent certain incidents. Now there was a theme for Slytherin, there was a theme for Voldemort, there was a theme for Harry, and if something mystical is going on, there's another theme. And I distinctly remember when they were flying over, there was a very specific theme, and that theme was quite recurring in terms of how it was utilized throughout the movie. If they were doing something mischievous, that theme was being played. So music was used in such a manner that in certain cases we actually use some of the themes to convey a message, or rather to represent a personality or the qualities of a certain person. Now this of course is heroism. So when you hear it, you feel as if now something heroic is going to happen. Alright, so moving on, we come into music in film and TV. So first and foremost, scoring versus the soundtrack. Now scoring is basically an original composition which is totally written for that particular film or the movie. Now, for example, the things that you saw earlier were basically written for only those movies. And a soundtrack, or rather a licensed song, is basically a song which was produced by an artist or a producer, which was basically taken into that movie. There we go. So this is basically a brief introduction that I put, and on the background is basically a sequence from the Dune movie, The Sandworm. So a few, now of course you guys saw the original compositions, but right now I'm going to show you a few licensed songs. So this is basically an original composition, the Bram sound of Inception. So when the time slows down, Hans Zimmer came up with a really iconic sound, which later started to being introduced into most of the musical compositions. This Bram sound. So when the time slows down, so you heard that. So this sound was basically produced in such a way where they went to a very vacant location. I think it was to a cathedral, and then they kept a piano in the middle, and they got a trumpet section or a brass section, and they basically played onto that piano, and that resonance was basically captured by using mics, and then that was introduced as the Bram sound. And later on, most of the composers started using the Bram sound to create a bit of tension, to create a bit of urgency in their music. So in comparison, we discussed about licensed songs, and now I'm going to play you a nice example of a song being used in a TV series. So you guys must have watched Stranger Things, yeah? There was a case where people was being abducted by this character called Vecna, and then there was a nice storyline in terms of having like a happy thought or whatever would help them to get rid of that spell kind of a situation. I'm not going to bore you with the backstory, but this was another example of using licensed music on TV. And in comes this character, Eddie Munson. So from the last season of Netflix, this completely changed how we approach licensed music. So I'll let you guys watch this sequence. So this was from the last season, the last episode of where Eddie Munson performed, there's a band called Metallica, mostly involved with rock and metal music, and they have a song called Master of Puppets. So these guys licensed the song into the last season, but how they did so was quite iconic. I'll let you guys watch this. So there we go. It's longer, but I'm going to cut short. But anyway, this was one of the most iconic usages of licensed music in basically the last 2 decades. And the repercussions were as such. I'm going to show you what happened. Master of Puppets became global #1 in the iTunes chart, and they stayed there for about 12 to 16 weeks. I can't exactly remember the duration, but they were there for quite some time. And then for the first time ever, Master of Puppets entered the Billboard Top 100 overall, regardless of the genre. They entered the overall Billboard Top 100 for the first time ever. And this song was actually released in 1986. So 40 years old in terms of how old this song was, but it made to Billboard Top 100, and then it entered to the iTunes Rock Chart as well. And then what happened was really cool. Eddie Munson, the character, I can't remember the name of the actor. Joseph Quinn. So Joseph Quinn actually got to meet the band, and then he got the exact replica of the guitar that he was playing at Stranger Things, signed by the members of Metallica, and then he also got the opportunity to jam with the band. And later, when these guys played the headliner in the US, in that festival run, they used the visuals from Stranger Things. So over here what you see is basically the visuals of Stranger Things being used at a Metallica concert. So the cultural impact was insane. Rock music became mainstream again, I would say. People got into the genre a lot more, and people were basically going crazy in terms of this character, the qualities that he stood for, and then of course for Metallica as well. And then right now, so back in the day, what usually happened was the movie was done and then it was edited and then it was sent to someone to score. That was basically what was happening previously. But then towards the late 2000s and towards right now, music is basically utilized in every angle, in every aspect. Specifically sound design is playing a huge role in most of the movie franchises. Now for example, Transformers played a huge role in terms of pushing the boundaries. And then right now, another perfect example would be Dune. Now Dune wouldn't have been the movie that it was without the sounds, 100%. If you had maybe a simple orchestral composition, that whole feeling that you get when you watch the movie wouldn't have been there, regardless of how good these actors were. Now these guys are brilliant actors, and Denis is of course who he is, but without the music, without the composition, without the sound design, the movie wouldn't have been the same. And there are a few perfect examples where music and sound design came into life. One incident was basically using bagpipes to represent the house Arrakis, right? Arrakis is the land. Or I'm not a geek. I'm good with music, but I'm very bad with these terminologies or whatever. But they used the bagpipes, but actually the bagpipes were played on the guitar, and then later on a few section of bagpipes were also introduced, but originally it was played on the guitar. And then in terms of sound design, in terms of coming up with the sounds of the worm, they basically went to deserts. They used different types of mics. They tried to record the movement of the sand, and then they did a lot of experiment, basically like an year or so. They did so much of experiment in the dunes and in like deserts, and tried to understand the behavior of sand. So you can watch these videos, they are on YouTube, and if you go to YouTube you can find like huge documentaries done with regards to sound design and composition of Dune. So I basically wanted to give a shout to these guys, because these guys started building worlds basically out of music. And then we come into gaming. So adaptive and dynamic scoring became a thing. So basically based on our movements that we try to portray on the game, the music automatically changed. Now this was first practiced in a game called Doom. So what I'm going to show you is quite gory, so don't take that against me, but this is one of the best games out there. But I just want to show you guys how music changes according to the body movements. So everything is, I don't know what tech they're using some sort of an advanced tech. Whichever the movement is, the music is going to replicate those movements, which is advanced. It's not easy to do, because the movements can be a little bit different, the timing might be a little bit off, but regardless of whichever the situation is, these guys figure it out. And I'll just play a few seconds from the video. So a lot of transitions were used. The sounds changed when you go for like different types of kills then and there. So everything is unplanned. You don't know what you're going to get, but depending on the movement that you're making, the music is going to get adjusted automatically. And then of course, world building. Again, when it comes to gaming, music stands its ground when it comes to world building. Now for example, if it comes to games like Halo, The Last of Us, Zelda, there's very specific music being written just for the purpose of building a world. Now for example, the famous Halo theme, of course, so that theme, of course, and then The Last of Us theme, and Zelda, and there's so much of games. I mean there's millions of games that uses these type of techniques specifically for an immersive experience, and of course for world building as well. And for example, FIFA, of course. Now FIFA is a little bit different, and most of the time what they do is they get licensed songs. Most of the artists get the opportunity to get their music on FIFA. Now for example, a perfect example that I can mention would be Priya Raghu. Now she got one of her tunes on FIFA, and that actually fueled her career. Now she plays in like all the big places. So the major placement that she got was actually on FIFA, and that made her famous. So it pays for the artist as well as for the game industry if they're using licensed music, and the payday is quite good as well. Now for artists, especially with what's happening right now in streaming industry. It's not that great of an income for the artists. They get paid in micro pennies. But if they get the opportunity to get a movie or a game placement, they can earn about 100 times more than what you get from Spotify, or even 1,000 times. It's that great. So another example is Forza Horizon, of course. Now I'm a drum and bass producer. I make a genre called drum and bass, and on Forza, so they have a bunch of tunes from this specific genre called drum and bass on Forza. I just wanted to give it a shout. And of course, there are instances where so many musicians are producing music and composing music for films and TV as well. Guys like Trent Reznor, who's from a band called Nine Inch Nails, produces quite a lot of material for movies and TV series. And then Moby, so in the background what you see is of a movie called Jason Bourne. And this character is basically Jason Bourne, and the theme was written by Moby for this movie franchise. And then Daft Punk, Brian Eno, the Bee Gees. Now Bee Gees wrote Saturday Night Fever, a song which was originally written as the soundtrack for Night Fever. And so many examples. I mean, these are just a few guys. There's like millions of artists who have written music specifically for movies and TV series as well. So it's not just about licensing, but there's also an aspect where these guys get to work just for the movie as well, or the TV series. So how sync licensing works? So usually there are institutions which are called publishers. Now the duty of the publisher is basically to get the catalog of a certain artist, and what they do is they use the catalog and then they pitch it for movies and TV series and any other commercial use for that matter. Not just for these, of course. Now if I want to get my music played at, let's say, a cricket stadium or a football stadium, I have to go through a publisher. Now the publisher would be able to pitch my music to that specific commercial use. So it's a little bit different to a label. Now what a label does is they basically sign an artist and then they release the music, and you get the split in terms of the royalties. Now the label will keep a certain amount of royalties and then you get the royalties. It's basically an avenue where you can put the music or you can release the music out. But when it comes to publishing, it's a little bit different. What usually happens is you get the catalog and the catalog is being transferred into this publishing agency, and what they do is they pitch the music into different avenues. And there's so many careers being made as well in terms of the publishing aspects, in terms of like scoring and music supervision. Now there is a job role called a music supervisor, and their job is basically to look into different artists, find songs that they think would be interesting, and then they approach the artists and then they try to cut a deal, and then they use these tunes into these movies and TV series. So this is very layman, by the way. I'm trying to make it understandable, but there's so much of technical aspects which goes into these job roles, and of course to publishing and licensing as well. So there are a few music supervisors who are really famous and they can't miss. And I mean, if you look at Stranger Things, the Duffer Brothers. Now these guys are the guys who are running Stranger Things. These guys are not music supervisors, but the sequence that I showed you guys earlier, the guitar part, the Master of Puppets sequence, was specifically written with Master of Puppets in mind. They weren't going to do it with any other song. They wanted the song, they got in touch with Metallica, they negotiated and somehow got the song, and that sequence was written only for that song. So there are certain directors and certain producers who have a sense of vision in terms of where they want to take their product as well. So in that case, the directors will also become music supervisors in one sense. Now Dennis is also a music supervisor because he wanted Hans. He was not going to do Dune without any other director, music director. So yeah, it works in in various aspects as well. It's not just having these job roles or whatever, but there can be visionaries who are working in these these TV series or in movies who wants certain music being or a certain flavor of music being displayed on their movies. So yeah, so those are some of the concepts that I wanted you guys to go through, or rather explain. It's not very comprehensive because I wanted you guys to get a sense of how things work, but if you guys have any questions you can ask as well. Yeah, do you guys have any questions that you might want to ask me? Anything? So I'll tell you the context in Sri Lanka as well. This is not done in Sri Lanka. This is done in a very primary way, but especially in terms of composing for music, composing for movies, usually what happens is still the older way. They do the edit, they do everything, and then it's been taken to a producer, and then they are asked to create the music, which is not actually the correct way of doing it. If you can get the music producer involved from the first stage itself, and if you can give them a great insight in terms of what the theme is going to be like, or what kind of storylines which is going to be involved in the in the movie, they can come up with something better. And there's going to be more time as well. Usually what happens is there's going to be a 2-month period, and these guys want to finish the edit as soon as possible, and then they start badgering the music producer to finish it within like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, which is not ideal, which is not the ideal scenario. They should be given at least a year, because you're taking about 2 years to make the movie, and then you're giving about 1 month for the music producer to finish the movie. That's not the ideal scenario. Now, when it comes to movies like Dune, for example, they do it collaboratively. From the get-go, every sequence, every shot that you see is directly communicated to Hans, and then he gives the work is being given to his producers and the sound design team. They collectively collaborate, and then they come up with a certain sound. So it's very collaborative in terms of what you see in other countries. Very collaborative, the way they work, and sort of interaction and exchange of ideas. Now there can be a certain idea that came about from the sound design team, and I think it was on Dune as well. They came up with a certain idea, and that idea was basically written into the movie because the sound was really good, so they wanted to do something with the sound. So they wrote an entire sequence for that movie. I think it was something to do with the sandworm. I can't exactly remember. It was some time ago that I watched it. And those helicopter sounds that you saw, the copters that they use on the Dune movie. So basically Hans and Dennis wanted something a bit more organic, but it had to sound a little bit, little bit analog as well. So they started experimenting with so many of bugs, basically, and then they found a few bug sounds, the wing fluttering sounds of certain bugs. They put them together, and they processed a lot, and then you got that sound. So the things that these guys do, of course, are quite amazing, but I hope that we get to do the same, because most of the time there's like a very few people who are involved in music composition, and it's not being given to newer generation of producers as well, which is something that needs to improve in the future, because there are so many producers who write music which can be used in movies. Now, for example, Hirushan, my good friend, he should be here today to do this panel with me. Sadly, he moved to Australia. Not sadly, but he moved to Australia. So he's actually writing music for Marvel movies. So for Marvel movies, for DC movies, for a lot of franchises out there. I think he had a few placements very recently on Lilo and Stitch as well. I think he has about 50 to 60 credits in terms of writing music for like movies and trailers, specifically for trailers, of course, but he should be here to discuss this topic as well. But there are people who are really good at what they do. It's just that there should be more space for people who are that talented into and invite them to the local movie industry. In certain cases, like the footage is really good, but we can't convey that message in the correct way because the music is lacking. So it comes back to what we're discussing in the original stage. Now, in any of those movies, if the music was not there, it would have been a different story. All right, so if you guys have any questions, you can ask me anything. And thank you so much for joining as well. I hope you guys understood some of the things that I discussed. But of course, if you guys are intrigued, you can always reach out to me on social media. And then of course, do a little bit of reading and do a little bit of research in terms of some of the concepts that are discussed. And you can also watch these movies and maybe think about some of the things that I discussed and you can think about how they are being applied to the creative process as well. Yeah? All right, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you. Cookie cream.